welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News, and straight to our top story this hour. An Israeli ground operation into Lebanon could be imminent. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant speaking to troops at the border earlier today. He said that eliminating Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah had been an important step, but was not everything. Well, Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati, meanwhile, says his government is now ready to fully implement that UN Resolution 1701 that was designed to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. More in this report by Jody Notilovitz.
Even after eliminating Hezbollah's leader Friday night, Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon have not slowed, as Fateh Sheriff Abu El Amein, a top Hamas official, and other senior Hamas members were killed in raids on southern Lebanon and central Beirut early Monday morning. Another strike on a building in the Kola neighborhood killed 3 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. While the IDF did not comment on this strike, it said dozens of Hezbollah rocket launchers and arms depots in the Bekaa Valley region of Lebanon were hit overnight, as well as sites in southern Lebanon being used by Hezbollah for terror operations against Israel.
There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country.
Speaking on Monday in the first televised address by a top Hezbollah leader since Nasrallah was killed, Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General, Sheikh Naim Qassem, said the group would appoint a new leader at the earliest opportunity.
The Islamic resistance will continue to confront the Israeli enemy in support of Gaza and Palestine, in defense of Lebanon and its people, and in response to assassinations and the killing of civilians. We will face any possible attack, and we are ready. If the Israelis decide to enter by land, the resistance forces are ready for a ground engagement. And with our trust in God Almighty, we are confident that the Israeli enemy will not achieve its goals, and we will emerge victorious from this battle.
On the Israeli side of the border, tanks have been gathering in preparation for a possible ground invasion. According to Israeli military officials, the operations in Lebanon are looking to degrade Hezbollah's capacity to attack Israel, eliminate the group's military leadership, and free the border areas of fighters and Hezbollah infrastructure.
Our goal is to return the residents of the North to their homes. For the return of the residents of the North to their homes, we will be ready to make every effort. This is the mission of the IDF, and we will employ all that is needed. Your forces, other forces, from the air, from the sea, and also from the land.
Lebanon's health ministry said more than 1,000 Lebanese were killed and 6,000 wounded in the past 2 weeks, not disclosing how many were civilians, adding that 1 million people had fled their homes. Around 60,000 Israelis have also been uprooted from their homes in the north since October 8th, and while the United States has continuously urged a diplomatic resolution to the conflict, it has simultaneously authorized military reinforcement in the region. With a possible ground invasion on the horizon, it is not clear when or if life will return to normal for those living along the border.
Well, before I speak to my guests tonight, let's head to northern Israel and get an update from our correspondent, Zach Anders, who's standing by. So, Zach, more reports today then that a full Israeli incursion into Lebanon could be imminent. What are you hearing?
Hearing the same. And as we drive up, we see an armored division, about 100 tanks that have staged in this area before one of the checkpoints. We've been hearing that a lot of the locals have been told don't film, don't take any pictures, but this is before the first military checkpoint, before you're allowed into this area now, into Kiryat Shmona. That's a new development. Over the last 24 hours, we did not see those tanks staged at this level in this area. We also did not incur any checkpoints that were turning people around, saying you cannot come into this area. What we believe right now, based on what we're seeing with artillery, outgoing artillery that is targeting a position just north of me, the southern Lebanese town of Qaim. This, again, is an area that's right there on the border, and we see a considerable amount of artillery fire in the last 2 hours targeting this area. It's very reminiscent of what we saw back in late October before ground forces rolled in at force into Gaza. This was predicated by heavy artillery activity. We saw attack helicopters at that time hitting those targets before ground forces moved in very short order, following them right behind those successive strikes. And we right now, throughout the night, have been seeing outgoing artillery. Now, I want to stress that we've been up here 11 months. We've seen the outgoing artillery targeting those locations before. It's picked up a notch. It's considerably more than what we've experienced here in our time on this station here in Kiryat Shmona. What we also see to our west are what we believe are Israeli airstrikes into these more mountainous areas in southern Lebanon. But I think the main thing tonight, Laura, is the fact that we're seeing so much of this air activity, which for the last 10 days has been concentrated around Lebanon into the north, trying to hit some more strategic targets, especially north of the country and along that border with Syria. I think the fact that we're seeing a considerable amount of activity now that we haven't noticed in the last 48 hours, but we're noticing it tonight, that's targeting these areas really close on the border in southern Lebanon. I think that should be a key indicator here of what's taking place. The number of soldiers that we've seen has swelled into the thousands in this area. You go into a gas station nearby and you're just bumping shoulder to shoulder with soldiers. Some of them tell me that they're reservists that have been called up. So this is obviously a very considerable amount of Israeli ground forces that are amassing here. Do we see any signs that anything is imminent? I think that's something that we will certainly be able to see tonight if that is what's taking shape. But right now, along these areas across the border, and we haven't had a chance to get very close, again, because the police and IDF are shutting some of these roads down that are closest to the border. But we, through our binoculars and through our camera lens, don't see anything along the fence that indicates something is very close to imminent. But certainly a huge swell of ground activity here in the north, something that we have not seen here for 11 months.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaki Dayan is the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. Great to have you with us,
Good evening, Laura.
And Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is the former commander of the Special Forces in the IDF. Good to have you with us, as always, Doron, as well. So, Doron, do you think a ground incursion could be imminent? Is it necessary? And what are the risks associated with it?
In terms of whether it's imminent or not, let's leave the predictions to others. But in terms of whether it's necessary, I think some limited incursion is necessary in terms of the high grounds that command our villages along the border. I don't think we'll... I mean, the objective of the war was declared as bringing our citizens back. Would the citizens come back when they know that on those high grounds there are still Hezbollah operatives that command the terrain and use those anti-missile...
Any idea how many Hezbollah terrorists remain in this part of Lebanon? Because so many people have fled, haven't they?
Some of them have of course, flee. They flee, but we shouldn't forget that many of those Hezbollah operatives are basically they live in those villages. I mean, those villages are... It's not that the Hezbollah soldiers are people that come from the north. They are part of the
They're
landscape.
Embedded in the
Exactly. This will be part of the issue, how we go forward with this in the southern tip of Lebanon. But I think what we see is preparations. We hear about special forces incursion inside. I'm sure this takes place. This is a preparation. I think we have great intelligence in military terms. We talk about a window of opportunity. So, and whether the conditions are ripe for such a move, the conditions are ripe. We succeeded to kill the leadership of Hezbollah. They are unorganized. And we have to secure some kind of buffer zone. The question is what the magnitude of such an attack would be.
OK. Yaki Dayan, President Biden says he is more worried than you know about the prospect of an Israeli ground incursion into Lebanon. Would the US support Israel if it chose to do that?
Laura, it's not a secret that the Americans don't want to see a ground invasion. They want to see an industrial quiet, definitely till November 5th, the election day in the United States. Any escalation or further escalation in the region might involve the U.S. forces, and they don't want to see that. Then they don't want to be in such a scenario. So they are extremely worried from such a scenario. And as we know, they were not heavily involved in the decision taken to eliminate Nasrallah and the leadership of the Hezbollah. At the same time, the Americans will provide defense forces to Israel. They don't want to see, and they already send a lot of messages to the Iranians telling them to avoid entering this ground or this regional war. And the Iranians are listening to the Americans. And another message that was sent by the Americans is not only that they will help to defend Israel if the Iranians decides to join the war, but Israel's strike is going to be much heavier, and their response is going to be much more harsher if the Iranians decide to strike Israel, as was the case on April 14th when they decided to launch 300 drones and
right, and the Iranians
missiles.
have said this afternoon they will not be sending any of their forces, just to clarify, to Lebanon or anywhere else to bail out their proxies. Don, what do you make of the noises coming out of the Lebanese government then in the wake of Nasrallah's assassination? They say they are now willing to talk about 1701.
I mean, when you have such a success and when such an organization which really commanded politically and militarily wise Lebanon, when such an organization is being not eliminated, but in such a fashion its leadership is destroyed, so the Lebanese have to rethink what's the next phase. They don't want to go into another civil war. We know the terrible civil war of the late 70s. And so they have to rethink whether they have the forces to succeed to create a new Lebanon, with an independent and strong army without any militia forces like Hezbollah. This would be yet to be seen. But I think Lebanese are thinking right now.
We should point out as well that in those strikes overnight, a top Hamas commander was eliminated. This was Fatih al-Sharif. He was also the head of the UNRWA teaching union. The UNRWA chief has just said he didn't know
as always,
that he was involved with Hamas at all. Just your thoughts on that, and how entrenched is Hamas in Lebanon?
Israel is fighting currently in 7 fronts. So we shouldn't forget, although the war in Gaza is much toned down, but still, there is a war in Gaza. There is still war against the Hamas. Just now, an Israeli soldier was wounded. So there is still a war going on with the Hamas. And as Israel struck the entire leadership of the Hezbollah, and that created a major chaos over there among the forces of the Hezbollah, there is an understanding that if you eliminate the leadership of the Hamas, that would create the same effect. So going after someone, the leadership of the Hamas in Lebanon, that's a very smart decision. And Israel just yesterday struck the Houthis in Yemen. So they are extremely proactive in all the fronts, and this is how it should stay, because we are, and I agree with the Prime Minister, currently we are winning, so we should still maintain this very hard strikes on all the fronts.
Of the momentum. Do you agree with that, Doron? Just real quick.
Sure, but not to be euphoric and to calculate our moves. I want to remind all of us that all those voices in Israel go destroy infrastructure of Lebanese government.
Well, there's a poll, I think 61% of Israelis are in favor of pressing ahead.
I think it's very nice the way the army calculated its moves and didn't rush when there was those voices saying, go ahead, invade.
Oh, so you're not one of the people who think Israel should have taken on Hezbollah right at the beginning?
I'm not sure. I think every move in the military campaign should be well prepared. There should be a window opportunity. There should be a legitimation outside. The conditions should be right, from weather to intelligence to whatever. So I think the moves were calculated smartly. There was first the southern front, then we moved to the northern front. And I think we have to salute. Maybe we can salute also Bibi, but I would salute first and outmost. I would salute Gallant and Herzi, and the commander of the North, the General Gordon, and they did it very politely and very nicely and very. I would say politely. When I say politely, I mean very meticulously and well measured.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add just one more sentence, which is that one of the conclusions of October 7th is that Israel has to have buffer zones. So as one was created in Gaza, one should be created in Lebanon, and this is what we are going to see now in any incursions and ground invasion.
The only issue with a buffer zone requires the presence of soldiers, and this is the question. But for sure, it should be secured by fire.
Okay, all right, thank you both. Well, as you heard there, Israel is fighting on multiple fronts. It carried out the second series of airstrikes on Hodeidah port in Yemen yesterday. The Iranian-backed Houthis targeted central Israel with long-range ballistic missiles 3 times this month and continue to harass global shipping as well. Our Lynn Plachmeyer has more.
The IDF struck the Houthi-controlled port of Hodeidah, Yemen on Sunday night, attacking oil reserves and military supplies. In the strike, 4 people were killed, among them 3 engineers, and over 30 people were wounded. The attack comes as Houthis fired a missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport just a day before, which was intercepted over Tel Aviv.
We see the attack today, 2,000 kilometers away in Hodeida, and its surroundings and the achievements, as they are reflected, are very impressive. And the meaning is clear. Those who try to attack us or harm the citizens of Israel will pay a very heavy price.
Even though the attack was lauded, the impact it has on the Houthis' capabilities remains unclear.
They were preparing for this kind of reaction from Israel just in case. They said that they'd emptied their oil storage. And we know that the Houthis have a very long experience of having to be nimble when it comes to airstrikes. So it won't be a knockout blow, but it certainly does send a very strong message, not just to the Houthis in Yemen, that they're not too far away to be hit, but also, of course, to Iran, who are in fact slightly closer to Israel than Hodeida port in Yemen.
The Iranian-backed Houthis said in a statement on Sunday that the Israeli strikes will not stop its, quote, support for the Palestinian people. Iran also condemned the strike, saying the raids were, quote, inhumane, and that Israel should not be allowed to attack countries in the axis of resistance. Meanwhile, with the IDF's activities ramping up not only in Yemen but also in Lebanon, the US is increasingly concerned over the possibility of a wider war, despite Israel assuring the world that it does not seek escalation.
We have no interest in expanding the war. We have no interest in looking for additional fronts. But if someone attacks Israel, we will settle the account with them, and we know how to do it.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it.
Despite diplomatic efforts, no agreement has been reached, neither with Hamas in Gaza nor with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And with the IDF's second strike in Yemen since the beginning of the war, chances are slim that this front will back down anytime soon.
Well, with us now, Catherine Perez-Shakdam is the Executive Director of We Believe in Israel and the Forum for Foreign Relations. Thanks for being with us, Catherine. Good to see you. So do you think the Houthis are getting the message this time?
They will get it. Look, there's something that is actually quite interesting about Yemen and the Houthi in particular, is that they are very tribal in their way of thinking. And, you know, the second that a warlord is not able to, you know, sustain victory or to guarantee victory in any way, shape or form, they tend to back out and back someone else. And I think that quite clearly the IRGC and the Islamic Republic of Iran is not capable of, number one, fighting its own war. If they're not capable of defending Hezbollah and actually offering their backing, or actually volunteering some men to the war effort, you know, as opposed to hiding behind their proxies, I think that the Houthi will not be interested in fighting a war that clearly they're going to lose, because Israel has demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt that its military capacity is incredible, and I would say bordering miraculous. There is nothing to be won here other than the destruction of, number one, the ability, the leadership, because let's just be real here, they're probably on the list somewhere. You know, why fight a war that is not their own? I mean, they don't care about Palestine, they don't care about the Palestinians. So in my mind, they're going to back off really, really quickly.
Well, I'm sure you've seen, as I have, Catherine, the videos on social media of Hezbollah loyalists having to flee their homes in Dahya in Beirut, you know, humiliating with their families, going to live in tents. And they are furious, but they're not furious at Israel. They're furious with Iran. They say Iran has left us out to dry and they're not coming to rescue us.
Well, it is true. I mean, look, the IRGC has had the propensity, I mean, ever since its existence, to hide behind its proxies and to be calling for the axis of resistance and whoever was listening, you know, to fight their war, their battles, and to be standing in between them and Israel. And I think that people are not inclined to do so anymore. And why should they? I mean, if the IRGC is so keen to be fighting Israel, then, you know, come out and play. They're not willing to do that. They know they can't. And also, they're arguing geography here to just justify the why they're not doing anything. Also, you know, if Hezbollah was hit the way it was hit, and the fact that Nasrallah is no longer, and that Hezbollah is literally a mirror image of the IRGC, if you're not capable of defending that, which is literally the only thing that sustains you right now, it's over. It's done. Now, Khamenei has left. I mean, I would say actually not left, but fled the building. And it's somewhere we don't know. My incline is that there's a protocol that was set in place quite a long time ago for him to be fleeing to Mashhad. because Mashhad is further east. It's also in the mountain. It's easier to defend. And also there's a lot of tunnels.
He's gone into hiding pretty much, the Supreme Leader.
He's gone into hiding. So now the question is where? What I know of is that, Mashhad is one of those places that has, a long time ago been allocated as a safe haven for the Ayatollah. So he may be, hiding somewhere in a tunnel in Mashhad. I mean, if anyone wants to go and check, please be welcome. But, hey ho, the Houthi, in my mind, will soon learn that it's not a good idea to go against Israel. If anything, they should refer to what happened to Nasrallah.
Okay, Catherine, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much. Great to talk to you as always. Catherine Perez-Shakdamner.
Pleasure.
Well, reactions to Israel's killing of Nasrallah have been mixed across the Arab world, while Syria and Iraq announced 3 days of mourning. The UAE, Bahrain and even Qatar were completely silent. The Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, said it stood with the Lebanese people but did not mention Nasrallah by name. Well, Simon Henderson is the director of the Gulf and Energy Policy Programme at the Washington Institute, and he joins us now. Simon, first of all, can you give us a bit of a history lesson? Talk us through Saudi Arabia's role in Lebanon over the years. They poured billions of dollars into the country in the 1990s, but their influence was ultimately curbed, wasn't it, by Hezbollah?
Absolutely. Saudi Arabia's history in Lebanon is a bit of bad history, and it went foul, and the Saudis essentially gave up on Lebanon. Having said that, of course, what is happening now in Lebanon, the Arab world and Saudi Arabia as well have decided is too big to ignore. But they're not quite sure how to play it and what to say. They're essentially, it seems, expressing sympathy for civilians, and one can guess that the Saudis condemn Hezbollah, but they're not quite saying it as such.
Do you think they're secretly pleased, Simon, and do you think this puts us a step closer to normalisation with Israel?
You're running ahead of yourself on that. They are. I think the Saudi government is pleased that Hezbollah, which is a weaponized arm of Iran, is getting clobbered. They are far less pleased that ordinary people are suffering as well, and that's apart from natural sympathy. It's because the fate of ordinary people in Lebanon, whether they're Lebanese or Palestinian, is of concern to the Saudi civilian population. And they don't want to take that population for granted. Saudi Arabia might not be a democracy, and indeed it's far from being a democracy, but even totalitarian governments have to take account of their public opinion.
Well, I mean, one of Hezbollah's most brutal acts, of course, in Lebanon was to assassinate the pro-Saudi Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. I'm wondering if you saw his son, Saad Hariri, eulogizing Nasrallah, the man who murdered his father, and if you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't actually see it, but I read about it. And yes, I was horrified by it, but no, I wasn't surprised by it. That is very much the way that it happens in that part of the world, and it's a great example of we shouldn't believe everything they say openly, or we should condition it on particular circumstances. And the son of Hariri, he clearly dislikes Hezbollah, clearly dislikes Iran. He also doesn't think much of Saudi Arabia, which at one point forced him to resign. And then as soon as he got out of Saudi Arabia, he unresigned. So what people actually say publicly for quotation always has to be analysed for more significant meaning.
Yes, the old grain of salt is needed here, isn't it? Simon, thank you very much indeed. Simon Henderson there.
Thank you.
Yaki Dayan, Doron Avital, obviously very different reactions then in Iran. and Saudi Arabia, as we just heard.
100%. I mean, the Iranians are willing to fight till the last drop of blood of the Houthis and the Lebanese and the Palestinians, but their doctrine is to further away or to push away any fight from their borders. This is what they want, and clearly they're thinking 5 times now if to react or not, because they are extremely worried about their nuclear military program. The Saudis are extremely happy that the Iranians are suffering so much casualties, but at the same time there is a big difference between what they express publicly to what they express behind closed doors, and it doesn't necessarily mean that a normalization is just nearby, because there the payment will have to be with hard currency on a Palestinian state to the Saudis.
Doan, you agree with that? Do you think we're a step closer to normalization?
I think the idea, the Biden doctrine or the second flow of the Abraham Accord, this is the only possible move ahead in the far future, not in the near future. But this, of course, as was said here, would mean paying with a Palestinian currency. Any idea to bypass the Palestinian issue on the way to normalization with Saudi Arabia wouldn't work. It's clear for us right now. And it's interesting what's going on right now. Everybody has to rethink. We think about the day after in Gaza, but now we have to think the day after in Lebanon. What kind of a Lebanon with its long history of civil wars and fractured society, what kind of Lebanon would emerge out of the rubbles? And we have
right, and there's perhaps some nervousness in the West, because taking out the bad guy doesn't always mean to turn out well. Look at Iraq.
I think we are much closer to the civil war of '76 in Lebanon than ever before.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I would say one more thing I would add, that also we have to rethink in terms of the coalition game that is taking place here. Because right now we have this air superiority, but if the Russian would play in with the then it would be a whole new story. So we have to be very careful and work out the coalition interests together.
Thank you both. Let's take a short break. We'll be back with another front, the front in Iraq. Stay tuned.
Sail for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad, with renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Iranian-backed militia in Iraq claimed to have attacked northern Israel with drones this Monday. The so-called Islamic resistance in Iraq unites various Shiite militia, all sworn to Israel's destruction. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini reports.
The Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility for several cruise missile and drone attacks on Israel in the early hours of Monday morning, including on Haifa in the center of the country. This after a number of strikes targeted southern Israel on Sunday and over the past week, as the pro-Iranian militias based in Iraq continue to intensify their attacks on Israel. The Islamic resistance in Iraq is a term used to describe a loose coalition of terror groups, a banner under which various Iran-backed Shiite militias and armed groups attack American and Israeli targets. Most famous is the Kataib Hezbollah militia group.
We are Kataib Hezbollah, and our enemy is America and the Zionists. And our message is that we will not retreat. We will either win or die.
The term Islamic resistance in Iraq emerged last October and has claimed responsibility for nearly 170 attacks on Israeli targets, the majority of which were either intercepted or didn't reach Israeli territory. More than 70% of the recorded attacks occurred this September alone, according to the Alma Institute, coinciding with the ongoing escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, which has suffered severe blows in the past weeks, including the killing of the group's infamous leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
There is a heat in the hearts. The news of Nasrallah's killing was like a volcano in our chests. Our bodies shiver. We want to be soldiers under the banner of Syed Hassan Nasrallah.
But the Islamic resistance in Iraq is not only an Israeli problem. In January, 3 U.S. service personnel were killed and dozens wounded in a drone attack on a military outpost in Jordan, near the border between Iraq and Syria. This after at least 15 attacks by Iranian-backed militias on American bases in Iraq and Syria since the start of the war, and many more since.
We know that Iran supports these groups. The degree to which they order and direct is something that intelligence analysts will look at. We know they support them. We know they resource them. We know they train them. We know that they're certainly not discouraging these attacks, whether it's attacks by the Houthis, what Hamas did on the 7th of October, what Hezbollah has proven capable of doing, and now, of course, what these militia groups continue to do in places like Iraq and Syria, and now Jordan.
The amplified attacks, part of the Iranian-run Ring of Fire surrounding Israel, with Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and militias in Iraq and Syria.
Well, the United States has just announced it's sending a few thousand more troops to the region to boost security. The US is also reportedly about to announce more than $300 million in funding for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. The US suspended its funding to UNRWA, the UN organisation, after Israel proved that some of its workers took part in the massacres of October 7th. Well, the Biden administration has consistently called for de-escalation and ceasefires, linking Hezbollah's attacks on northern Israel to the war with Hamas in Gaza. But both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris welcomed the killing of Nasrallah. We're here to talk about US strategy more broadly. We're joined by Jonathan Shanzer. He's a Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thanks very much for being with us, Jonathan. So what does the Biden administration want now from Israel, now that Hezbollah has all but collapsed under Israel's attacks, and now that we are on the eve of a possible Israeli ground incursion?
Well, the United States wants this all to go away. And this has been, I think, clear from the start from President Biden and from Vice President Harris. They would not like to have a major war going on in the Middle East as we head into an election here in about 1 month's time here in Washington. So what they're trying to do is to de-escalate. What I think has been missing on the part of this administration is that, sure, look, everybody would like to de-escalate, but the only way that happens is through deterrence. And that comes from the sorts of victories that Israel was able to notch in Lebanon, in Yemen, and even in the border between Iraq and Syria, the border between Lebanon and Syria. Israel has been striking near and far taking out Iran-backed actors, taking out those various threats, thinning out the ranks of these terrorist groups, removing some of their capabilities, some of their more foreboding capabilities. All of these things, I think, need to keep happening until Iran begins to understand that it is losing its so-called ring of fire capability, that it is no longer going to be able to mount the kinds of attacks that it had planned heading into October 7th and over the year that has transpired. Israel reached a breaking point, and I think we saw what happens when Israel decides to go on the counteroffensive. That means weakness for Iran and its allies. That needs to continue until capitulation. That's how wars are won.
Well, Hezbollah collapsed far more quickly than anybody could have predicted. It's had a catastrophic fortnight. This is something that's been in the planning in Israel for many years. The Ayatollah of Iran has gone into hiding. Do you think it's a similar situation for Iran? Or should the US be stepping up the pressure now on Tehran?
Look, the U.S. should be stepping up diplomatic pressure, political pressure. We should be isolating the Iranians. We should be imposing sanctions. We should be putting a more aggressive force posture out there in the region. The Iranians need to feel the squeeze. Hezbollah needs to continue to suffer losses. Hamas needs to continue to suffer losses. The Houthis need to. This is how you get an end of conflict, is for the other side to simply give up. Now, I want to say up front here that Hezbollah is not done as a fighting force. They still have a massive amount of armaments. The big question is, can they use them without getting struck by the Israelis? We've seen a bunch of attacks just over the last couple of days. They have hammered Israel's north and even a little bit further south than we're used to. So they're still landing some blows. What Israel needs to do, though, is to not let up. They should not let Hezbollah get up off the mat. They need to really impress upon the entire region that Hezbollah's lifespan is shortened by a great extent here by what we've seen over the last couple of days. I think Israel still has a lot of capabilities still in store that it can use, and it needs the U.S. to give their blessing for these kinds of attacks. I think another couple of weeks of this, and Hezbollah might raise the white flag.
We had some interesting reactions to the killing of Nasrallah from the moderate Arab countries. Saudi Arabia not mentioning Nasrallah by name, saying they stand with the Lebanese civilians, which is exactly what the French are saying, interestingly. Do you think that the killing of Nasrallah moves Israel closer to a strategic agreement with Saudi Arabia?
Look, I think so. I mean, but actually, maybe not even Nasrallah. I mean, I think his death has resonated among the Saudi public. They have no love for this Shiite militia leader with so much blood on his hands. But I have to say, I think the Israelis taking out Houthi targets yesterday and striking, power stations and striking the Houthi airport and other assets belonging to this terrorist organization that had been targeting the Saudis for many years. I think that's resonating right now in Riyadh. And then you look around the rest of the region, I think there are a lot of people in Lebanon right now that are breathing a sigh of relief that Hezbollah's stranglehold on their country has been loosened. We've seen celebrations in places like Syria, where, of course, Nasrallah led the attack of Hezbollah, his militia, killing tens of thousands of Syrians. There's a large number of actors in the Middle East right now that I think are quite thankful for what Israel has done. The question now is, can the United States, can the West rally these actors, rally the rest of these Arab states to support what is going on here, to support the weakening of the axis of aggressors, as we would call it, the Shiite axis led by Iran. That is what is so important here. That actually could be consequential in trying to shape the final outcome of this conflict.
Jonathan, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Jonathan Shanter there at the FDD. Yaki Dayan and Doron Avital are with me in the studio. You were nodding your head vigorously there, yeah?
Listen, I agree 100%. I would say I would do a fine-tuning to what your guest just said about the lack of deterrence by the American administration. I would say that Biden doctrine involves deterrence as building coalition and defense as well, working with CENTCOM. What they lack is offense. And there is a tipping point here, tipping point in which you can actually create a new Middle East, in which if you go into offense, and if the American administration was bold enough to go into offense on the Iranian regime, then you could have changed the entire structure of the Middle East. You could have really created a new Middle East. So there is a tipping.
You're talking about militarily or diplomatically?
100% militarily, because you are speaking now about creating a new Middle East. There is the Shia crescent in which the Iranians created with their proxies a crescent of terrorism around the region, and you see the moderate Sunni countries. And if you go into offense now on the Iranians, because this is the main problem, if you want to change the structure, if you want to solve this problem, you have to hit the Iranians. And by hitting the Iranians, you can actually even create a regime change. So the American administration has to be bold enough to go into offense militarily in order to change this structure.
Doron.
2 words of caution. First of all, Americans have a long history of trying to do regime changes that didn't work out the best, and they're a little bit tired from Afghanistan and the Iraqi campaign, so they will be very careful not to move, as they know that Iran is backed by its own
I'm not speaking about boots on the ground.
Yeah, you're talking about hitting the nuclear infrastructure, for sure. So we have to weigh this in. But also us as Israelis, we have to, when we see the celebration in Syria or in other places for us eliminating the Hezbollah leader, we shouldn't forget when we were hitting Palestine in '82, the Shiites were welcoming us as liberators. So the Middle East is a very complicated puzzle. Exactly. So it's a complicated puzzle. We should play our cards very carefully, not involve ourselves in any civil wars, not in Jordan and not in Lebanon and not in Syria. Yeah. And we have to be very careful.
Not to get involved.
If I can add one more sentence, I would say that the main problem in the Middle East is Iran, and we still haven't hit Iran hard enough in order to create some kind of a structural change in the Middle East. So if you want to create a structural change, it has to be Iran, but not Israel solely. So when America is joining Israel, it hasn't have to be boots on the ground. It can be with different methods, but hitting Iran, that's the main problem, and that would change the Middle East.
And just real quick, another broader issue perhaps for both of you, but given how divergent the US policy has been in the Middle East and the Israeli policy in the Middle East, with the US consistently pressing for a ceasefire and for Israel to halt its offensives. Do you think Israel needs to think more carefully about how dependent it is on the US going forward, militarily?
It's like you don't choose a family, you don't choose your coalition. This is our coalition. The West, I always say to my friend, the West is our coalition. The West is the US and Europe. So we shouldn't bash them that far, and we have to work with them. There's disagreement, but we have to be in sync. I think Gallant and the leadership of the IDF is completely and intimately working hand in hand with the US, with the Pentagon and the US military leadership. On the political level, like in the Middle East in general, there's differences of rhetorics and opinions, but in the level of the working forces, we work at sync, and we should continue.
Laura, the Americans are not only our best friend, but I would say our only friend now in the world. So definitely 100% we have to take into consideration the American interest in the region. And we are heavily dependent on the Americans in terms of ammunition, in terms of the Security Council, the American veto. So 100% it has to go hand in hand.
That's my point. Can Israel think about a future where it is less dependent on the United States?
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, in terms of producing ammunition and things like that, 100% yes. But at the same time, listen, we want to be in the coalition with the United States because we are presenting or demonstrating the same interests and same values in the region. So we want to be with the Americans, but less dependent on them, definitely.
And we are not part of the other coalition. It's very clear. And there's another coalition.
Yes.
All right, Doron Avital, Yahi Dayan, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you very much.
Well, to other news, the United Arab Emirates has accused armed forces in Sudan, the armed forces of Sudan, of trying to assassinate its ambassador. The UAE's foreign ministry called the bombing of its diplomat's home in Khartoum a heinous crime. Sudan's army has been fighting the RSF militia for over a year now. Tens of thousands of Sudanese have been killed and millions more displaced. Well, for more on that, let's go to Dubai. We're joined by our correspondent, Bastien Bourri. So, Bastien, this is a very serious allegation, isn't it? What happened exactly?
Well, for the moment, it's a bit hazy because on the one hand, the UAE claims, as you said, its ambassador's residence was not targeted by a bombardment, but hit by a strike, which we don't yet know was aimed directly at Emirati installations. So in terms of reaction, Abu Dhabi stressed the importance of protecting diplomatic buildings and embassy staff in accordance with the treaties that regulate diplomatic relations. And on the other hand, the Sudanese army rejected this accusation, saying that, on the contrary, it was the RSF force that was responsible for the bombing. So at this stage, what is certain is that, yes, the Emirati ambassador's residence in Khartoum was indeed hit by a strike, which seriously damaged its entire structure, but we still don't know who the bomb belonged to. But knowing that the RSF has no air assets and that, so far at least, Sudan's Air Force has remained loyal to the Sudanese army, suspicions pretty clearly point to a strike orchestrated by the official Sudanese authorities.
And the Sudanese army and the UAE are at odds already in this war, aren't they?
Absolutely. Those who accuse the UAE of militarily supporting the opposing side, namely the RSF force, against the Sudanese army, do so for two reasons. First, they believe that Abu Dhabi is seeking to destabilize Sudan in order to weaken its state and profit more or less secretly from the country's wealth, particularly its gold wealth. We know that Sudan has an abundance of gold mines and is even one of the largest producers on the African continent. We also know that gold is at the heart of this carnage, so to speak, taking place in Sudan, because gold trade, which, by the way, the RSF controlled before this war broke out, is a key source of funding for both sides in this conflict. And the other charge, so to speak, is that the Emiratis are indirectly fighting the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan, which is known to have increasingly close ties with the Sudanese authorities and the army. But as of now, Abu Dhabi denies all this.
Yeah, very interesting story that is not getting a lot of attention at the moment. So thanks for filling us in, Bastien Bourri there over in Dubai. Well, tens of thousands of Israelis remain displaced from their homes in the north. But despite the very dangerous situation along the border, some have chosen to stay to defend their homes and tend to their farms. Our Robert Swift has been visiting some of the communities on the front lines of the war with Hezbollah. Take a look.
For nearly 12 months straight, Kiryat Shmona has been a ghost town. Its streets all but abandoned, except for the most resilient of its residents. Of the stubborn few that remain, not all are native-born, Hebrew-speaking Israelis.
Well, hi, I'm Chris. I'm a Scottish atheist here in Kiryat Shmona in the north of Israel.
Originally from Edinburgh, Chris escaped a rough upbringing and has called Israel home for 20 years. He moved to the country's north after he met an Israeli woman, and he stays when others have left to remain close to his ex-wife and their two children.
And it's what they want. They want us to run. And I think there's something about my childhood that no more running. You have to stand up when you're getting bullied, when you're getting pushed down, whether it's an oppressor, whether it's terrorism, you have to stand up to that. You can't run.
Of the communities evacuated along the Lebanese border, Kiryat Shmona is the largest. 90% of its population are gone, fleeing the rockets launched at the city almost daily. But Chris, like around 1,000 other residents, refuses to run. As the war has lengthened, the scale of the bombardments against Kiryat Shmona have increased, causing residents who stayed for 10 months to give up and leave in recent weeks, Chris says.
I mean, at the beginning of the war, it was 8 or 9 missiles a day, maybe 4 or 5. But now it's 40, 50, 60.
With his living room window looking out directly onto the border and his apartment on the 4th floor, Chris's options during incoming fire are limited.
So I'll grab my helmet, I throw it on, because we only have maybe 4 to 5 seconds before it hits us here. So I'll run into here, I'll pull this sliding door back, and what I do is I pull the fridge door open and I'll hide behind the fridge door.
During the worst bouts of fire, Chris and his 2 remaining neighbours have spent nights sleeping in the bomb shelter in their building's basement. For good reason. The street in front of his home is pockmarked from rocket strikes.
At least in this 500-metre radius. At least 30 have landed. So as you can see, even on the other side of the street, everything is all boarded up, destroyed. You'll see where a Farkan missile landed, which is one of the bigger Hezbollah missiles supplied by Iran. And what you can see here is basically the remains of the wee Honda. It's gone.
This was your car?
Aye, gone.
Other homes in the city have sustained much greater damage.
Just over my right shoulder, this is a location where one of these rockets impacted. You can see the trees around. You can see the brown dots where the trees have been shredded from the shrapnel of that explosion, and the fencing and the pavement are just destroyed. But most of the significant damage is actually over here on this side, where this house to the left of us has been completely shredded by the shrapnel that was thrown out by that impact. And even more significantly, you'll see these 2 cars that have been destroyed. Now, the first of these cars, this one here, completely burnt out. You can see the fence along behind it where the burn damage is, as well as the trees around it are completely scorched. The second car, this one here, this damage here is actually, it looks like melt damage because of the intensity of the inferno from the first car. But you'll also notice that the front of the car is completely shredded with shrapnel that was thrown out from the original explosion. At the back here, you'll also see the second house where the windows have been boarded up, again, where they've been shredded from the shrapnel. But this tree here, I think, is the most demonstrative of the explosion. The top of the tree has just been completely decapitated, and it's been knocked off, presumably from the force of the explosion that went off on the other side of the street.
Smaller communities along the Israel-Lebanon border have fared no better than Kiryat Shmona. We travel south to Malkia, a kibbutz directly on the border, to visit Chris's friend. Minutes before, sirens sounded in the kibbutz.
Hey buddy, how you doing? I know, it was crazy. We watched it coming over from Kiryat Shmona just now.
We take back roads, avoiding the main approach to Malkia, which is designated as red, meaning off limits to travel due to Hezbollah attacks. The forests and agricultural land in the hills approaching the kibbutz are scorched from months of cross-border barrages, with the carcasses of cattle lying in the fields where the animals fell. In Malkia we meet Dean, another Brit who has made the north of Israel his home. After marrying an Israeli and living in London many years, the open hills of northern Israel became a home for him, his wife and children. Dean is one of the few left living in the kibbutz.
When the war started, my wife and daughter evacuated. We took them to a safe place. I stayed because I was a volunteer working for the kibbutz, helping with the security, helping with the fires. And I said, there's no way you're taking me away from here when the kibbutz needs the help.
Malkia is so vulnerable to attacks from Lebanon that firefighters are not permitted to attend the kibbutz, meaning the handful of volunteers like Dean are left to tackle fires that occur using improvised equipment.
What am I doing caught up in this fight? It's like any expat caught up in a fight in any country around the world. This just happens to be my home now. It has been for 8 years, and I'm here, and I will remain here, and I will protect my town, my village, my kibbutz, and the country. This is my home, and why would I run back to England?
While travelling around the kibbutz, Dean keeps his flak vest and a weapon close to hand.
You don't have a gun license?
No, because I don't speak Hebrew.
Like many northern communities, Malkia is close enough to the border that you could shout to Lebanese villagers on the other side.
That's Lebanon. Yeah. Okay. And the reason we haven't hit that is because that belongs to the Lebanese army and not Hezbollah. That was built by the Israelis when we were last in Lebanon. I'm going to park here for a quick escape, okay? The viewpoint, this was built 2 years ago. Tourists to come, because we have the hotel here. Picnic area, just enjoy the view. You know, because we're not at war with the farmers. You know, we wave at the farmers every day, you know, hi, how are you doing? You know, now most of the buildings have been taken out because the Hezbollah have used them for firing.
How much civilian activity do you see on that side? Are there still people living there?
No, all the farmers are gone. Everyone is gone.
As the conflict on the border flares up to new heights, yet more people, Israelis and Lebanese, are being displaced. For their parts, Chris and Dean intend to stay, no matter where the spiralling violence leads.
There's probably less than 1,000 people left in Kiryat Shmona and the entire surrounding area. But if we all leave, they're going to win.
If everyone decided they're all going to evacuate, then there's no one left to protect our kibbutz. So we stayed.
Well, brave guys staying in their homes up in the north, despite the dangers, and great reporting from Robert Swift there. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Many thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do stay with us on I24 News. Benita's with you next with the rundown. Good night.
Sail for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad, with renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayasad.fr.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video On Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video On Demand app today.
This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Is Iran working to conduct assassinations inside Israel? Well, the Shin Bet security agency is today warning that Iran has been trying to carry out targeted killings inside the Jewish state, adding that several recent plots had been foiled at advanced stages. It's calling on the public to report any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, developments across the northern front. Red alert sirens sounding in some northern communities just moments ago. Once again, the question remains, will Israeli troops conduct a ground operation inside Lebanon to remove the Hezbollah terror threat from the border area and ensure that tens of thousands of evacuated Israelis can return to their homes in northern Israel? Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is today strongly hinting that the IDF is preparing to launch such a ground offensive. There are reports, too, that Israel is set to inform the US of plans for an imminent, limited ground operation. Day 360 of the war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. Hezbollah has been showing its solidarity with the terror group in Gaza throughout the war. The IDF intensifying its strikes against Hezbollah in recent weeks, eliminating most of its leadership, including Chief Hassan Nasrallah and 20 other terrorists in Beirut on the weekend, as Benjamin Netanyahu delivered his address to the UN General Assembly in New York. And on the ground, those red alert sirens sounding on several occasions throughout the day as Hezbollah continues attacking the north. More in this report by our Jody Natilovitz.
Even after eliminating Hezbollah's leader Friday night, Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon have not slowed, as Fateh Sheriff Abu El Amein, a top Hamas official, and other senior Hamas members were killed in raids on southern Lebanon and central Beirut early Monday morning. Another strike on a building in the Kola neighborhood killed 3 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. While the IDF did not comment on this strike, it said dozens of Hezbollah rocket launchers and arms depots in the Bekaa Valley region of Lebanon were hit overnight, as well as sites in southern Lebanon being used by Hezbollah for terror operations against Israel.
There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There is nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country.
Speaking on Monday in the first televised address by a top Hezbollah leader since Nasrallah was killed, Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General, Sheikh Naim Qassem, said the group would appoint a new leader at the earliest opportunity.
The Islamic resistance will continue to confront the Israeli enemy in support of Gaza and Palestine, in defense of Lebanon and its people, and in response to assassinations and the killing of civilians. We will face any possible attack, and we are ready. If the Israelis decide to enter by land, the resistance forces are ready for a ground engagement. And with our trust in God Almighty, we are confident that the Israeli enemy will not achieve its goals, and we will emerge victorious from this battle.
On the Israeli side of the border, tanks have been gathering in preparation for a possible ground invasion. According to Israeli military officials, the operations in Lebanon are looking to degrade Hezbollah's capacity to attack Israel, eliminate the group's military leadership, and free the border areas of fighters and Hezbollah infrastructure.
The next stage in the war against Hezbollah will begin soon. It will be a significant factor in changing the security situation and will allow us to complete the important part of the war's goals, returning the residents to their homes.
Lebanon's health ministry said more than 1,000 Lebanese were killed and 6,000 wounded in the past 2 weeks, not disclosing how many were civilians, adding that 1 million people had fled their homes. Around 60,000 Israelis have also been uprooted from their homes in the north since October 8th, and while the United States has continuously urged a diplomatic resolution to the conflict, it has simultaneously authorized military reinforcement in the region. With a possible ground invasion on the horizon, it is not clear when or if life will return to normal for those living along the border.
So for more insight, we welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesperson in the IDF and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, and our correspondent, Robert Swift. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. An important time, an ongoing development up north as we were speaking, as we were coming to air. Once again, red alert sirens. And Jonathan, Yoav Gallant says the next stage of the war in the north begins soon. The current phase, the last 2 weeks, has been pretty eventful. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the last 2 weeks, I think, have been very influential. Hezbollah today is very unsimilar from what it was 2 weeks ago in terms of its leadership, its tactical capabilities, in terms of its, I think, fighting spirit. And when Israel now continues to move forward and asks itself, okay, the ultimate aim is to return Israelis home. How can that be achieved? It's either you use force or there's a credible threat of using force. The end is to get some kind of an agreement whereby it's safe enough for Israelis to return home. How that is brought about, either by actually conducting operations in southern Lebanon on the ground and clearing the area, at least temporarily, or directly going for a deal. And I think that what we're seeing now, the last few days, and what we will see in the coming days, will be lots of Israeli messaging and posturing towards Hezbollah, towards Tehran, towards Beirut, and also, to a certain extent, Washington and Paris, indicating that Israel is ready and, if necessary, will take those steps in order to bring people home, but it doesn't want to. And if this can be achieved without the use of force or more force on the ground, much better.
We're going to take a deeper look at exactly that, the potential strategy, in a few moments. Stay with us, though. Right now, we want to find out exactly what is happening up north on the ground. We go live to correspondent Zach Anders, and he joins us from northern Israel. And Zach, we heard those red alert sirens just moments ago as we came to start the show, and we also know that Yoav Gallant is hinting that Israel is getting ready to launch a ground operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is the latest?
Well, the latest update for the red alarms that were triggered again in the Haifa metro area, multiple interceptions reported. This is just a few moments ago, so we don't have any reports from MATA as to casualties or potential damage. We're not seeing anything significant pop right now. Surprisingly, a lot of this fire throughout the day as Hezbollah has claimed responsibility on their social channels for 10 attacks on Israel. This is primarily in the Western Galilee along the coast. We have not seen a lot of concentrated activity here into the Galilee Panhandle. In Kiryat Shmona, where we are this evening, we do not see, we have not been under an attack for several hours here. It's relatively quiet. Now, on the road into Kiryat Shmona, you can see, and a lot of people on Israeli social media posting online images, and I believe we have some of those for you. As you drive in, it appears an entire armored division is staging here in the Galilee. As we are around these gas stations, we're noting, shoulder-to-shoulder interactions with soldiers in these gas stations. I've even spoken to a few of them. They tell me that they're reservists that are up here at this moment. So we've been seeing a considerable amount of activity, and also checkpoints are turning people around. There's new checkpoints on certain roads as you get closer to this border in some areas that we are no longer able to access. I've been up here 11 months. This is the closest I've ever felt for there to be imminent action on the ground. But we have a good vantage point here on the fence itself. We don't see right now any activity that would suggest that an invasion is imminent in our location. But again, this is a very long border, very mountainous in certain areas. So certainly there's areas that we can't access right now. But we do see IDF activity and especially heavy artillery targeting some positions just across the border in the southern Lebanese town of Qaim. There appears to have been at least 10 strikes over the last few hours in this area that's right there on the border. And again, these areas that are closest to the border are those Hezbollah front line of defense, are supposedly where Hezbollah is the most entrenched. So certainly areas that would see a heavy amount of targeted air activity on artillery before any ground forces were to move into those areas.
And Zach, there's still so much speculation around the likely responses to the weekend elimination of Hassan Nasrallah and at least 20 other terrorists in the underground headquarters in Beirut. What details are emerging about the funerals, and is there likely to be any real response as such during this mourning period, which started today?
You know, that's a good question, one that we got conflicting reports, even Hezbollah posting that there would be a Nasrallah funeral in Lebanon yesterday, which did not take place after the body was recovered. We have a broad array of questions about what that would look like, considering that this group is, you could fairly say, on the run, especially command and leadership inside Hezbollah. Certainly will not be making, you would imagine, would not be bold enough to try and make public appearances right now. The interim message that we have before this Shura Council is set to, or supposedly set to hold a vote to pick the new Secretary General, the new Hassan Nasrallah, that we're still hearing that vote has not taken place yet, but there was an interim message from a Hezbollah senior leader continuing to vow that the Hezbollah fight will go on, that while admitting that they have suffered some severe blows, that they are regrouping, recollecting, and that they will continue as a resistance force in Lebanon. But you're right, that's an interesting question. And, you know, one of the storylines that I think might have been missed amidst this chaos of the headlines is the Iranian flights that have been turned back. We know of at least one confirmed flight from Tehran was told by Beirut ATC, air traffic control, essentially turn around now over Iranian airspace. You're not going to be permitted to land here in Beirut. Some speculation as to the timing of that flight. What was on that flight, of course, was it personnel, was it weapons, or is it potentially possible that this was a body retrieval effort to pick up some of the dead and bring them back for funerals, memorials in Iran? Would Hassan Nasrallah be one of those men? You know, right now we just don't have anything confirmed, no viable understanding of what's taking shape there. But yeah, mass public service in southern Beirut right now does not seem like something that you would think Hezbollah would put forward, but perhaps that still is what they intend to do.
Correspondent Zach Anders live from northern Israel. More to come from Zach, of course, in the coming hours. Thank you, Zach. And now still here in studio, correspondent Robert Swift. There are new developments as well in southern Lebanon, in fact, close to Beirut. Tell us what is known, a developing situation. What is the update?
Yeah, that's right. So apparently an airstrike there. It's a hangar, a storage facility close to the airport. It's understood that surface-to-air missiles were being stored there and then being targeted. If this is indeed the case, then my assessment would be that this is an attempt by the Israeli military to gain greater superiority, over the airspace. Essentially, the more they can degrade Hezbollah's air defences, the more freedom they have to act there, the more they can support ground operations there.
Jonathan, your thoughts on exactly that?
Yeah, so this has been going on for many years. That's been really at the top of Hezbollah's wish list and asking list of the Iranians. They have wanted long-range, precise munitions in order to strike sensitive and strategic targets in Israel, and they have been trying to develop ground-to-air missiles, and basically something that can shoot down Israeli jets or at least take down Israeli UAVs. That has been really an important effort for Hezbollah, together with their ability to strike naval targets like the gas rig or ships at sea. Those three components, really the most important things. And you could see that after the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, what the IDF went after immediately after were shore-to-sea missiles, and now it is picking or striking, reportedly, storage facilities where ground-to-air missiles were stored. These are very important capabilities that Israel knows that Hezbollah has, and Israel wants to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't continue to keep them if and when this escalates further.
Jonathan, Israel has reportedly notified the US of its intent to perform a limited ground operation in Lebanon. How necessary is it that Washington is kept in the loop about any pending decisions?
I think it's tremendously important that Israel formulates strategy and shares it with the US in order to have American support and in order to eventually achieve its own strategic aims with American help. I don't think that America, with the current administration, and Israel will see everything eye to eye, but I think that it would serve the long-term goals of Israel when we look at Gaza, Lebanon, and most importantly, speaking about the real problem in the region, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. If Israel squirrels with the US and doesn't agree on the details of issues in Lebanon and Gaza, then for sure we won't be able to agree on the really important thing, and that is Iran. So if it were up to me, I would forfeit independence and local agency when it comes to these topics in order to deal with the really important one, and that is Iran, where Israel will need American assistance, diplomatic and military, in order to deal with it.
Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to discuss this in more detail much later on in the show. Right now, another development: a teacher by day, a terrorist by night. The Hamas leader in Lebanon has today been killed in an Israeli airstrike in the southern Lebanese city of Tyre. The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, confirming that Fatah Sherif was employed by the agency. It insists he was being probed over his political activities. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim is in Washington and has this update.
Well, for many years now, and especially since October the 7th, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, UNRWA Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini, and other high-ranking UN officials have gone to great lengths to try to convince the public and UNRWA donors that UNRWA is free from influence from Hamas and other Palestinian terror organizations. Israel has accused the agency repeatedly of capitulating to Hamas and holding Hamas leaders within its own ranks. Those are claims that UNRWA has vehemently disputed, but those claims lack further credibility today as Hamas claims the head of the teachers union of UNRWA schools in Lebanon and a school principal there as one of their own. Fatih al-Sharif, killed in an Israeli airstrike. He had long been accused by an organization called UN Watch of being a high-ranking Hamas official. Now, UNRWA took those claims under consideration and suspended Sharif for 3 months earlier this year, but despite the mountain of evidence, they never fired him. In fact, there was a strike that was held by his colleagues there at the UNRWA schools in Lebanon to try to get him reinstated. UN Watch says that's in fact what did happen, that Philip Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, caved and reinstated him. UNRWA denies that, but in any case, it appears that the strike led to more pressure on Lazzarini and UNRWA to keep Sharif on the rolls. In any case, it will be interesting going forward here to see if UNRWA and UN officials finally come out and say, we made a mistake on this one. UNRWA went so far as to commission an independent report earlier this year, a commission led by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, together with a number of Scandinavian institutions that essentially found that UNRWA was doing what it needed to do to weed out potential terrorists from within their ranks. But when you have the Hamas commander in Lebanon killed by an Israeli airstrike, the same Hamas commander who was leading UNRWA schools of all institutions, well, it leads to many more questions for UNRWA, uncomfortable questions that the institution simply has refused to answer, coherently at least, in the past. Reporting from outside the State Department here in Washington, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, the UNRWA role in this war. There have been stories out of Gaza. There's been evidence. It's been refuted by the UN. Now we are literally hearing about the Hamas leader in Lebanon also being a school principal. The allegations existed before. They were refuted. What now? Who is accountable?
For me, it's as clear as day. And what really bothers me is, why isn't Israel officially, publicly, and in a strategic manner addressing this and attacking this? And I know of certain members of Knesset that are trying to bring forward legislation that will declare UNRWA as either a terrorist organization, which is taking it really to the extreme, or an accessory to terror organizations, or to have them exempt from the immunities that UN organizations have in Israel. And what I really can't understand is why aren't we doing anything of substance when it comes to UNRWA? They are still in Gaza. They are still managing schools in Judea and Samaria in Area A under PA guidance. They are still allowed to operate tremendous amounts of funds all over the Middle East, including in areas where we have control. And I ask myself, why aren't we doing anything serious about it? And what is the end strategy here? Because for anybody watching analytically, without skin in the game, you see UNRWA, you clearly understand that there is something deeply, profoundly wrong with that organization. It is rotten. It is in bed with terrorist organizations wherever it is, whether it is in Gaza, in Lebanon, or in Judea and Samaria. They're supposed to do good, but they are up neck deep in providing for terrorist organizations, either as a front or as institutional centers. So what more needs to happen for the state of Israel? And, you know, I don't blame Lazzarini and other countries for funding or not funding. I think Israel should speak in a clear official voice and take real action against UNRWA. Every day that we don't is a day that we will regret it in the future.
The evidence is there. It is clear to see, as you say, so many questions remain. Stay with us, gentlemen. There's so many developments we need to unpack right now. Israel is facing threats on several fronts. The Houthis in Yemen launching missiles at central Tel Aviv in recent days. They were intercepted. Now, for the second time during this war, the IDF has struck back, targeting terror sites in Yemen on Sunday. More in this report by Arlene Plachmeier.
The IDF struck the Houthi-controlled port of Hodeidah, Yemen on Sunday night, attacking oil reserves and military supplies. In the strike, 4 people were killed, among them 3 engineers, and over 30 people were wounded. The attack comes as Houthis fired a missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport just a day before, which was intercepted over Tel Aviv.
We see the attack today, 2,000 kilometers away in Hodeidah, and its surroundings and the achievements, as they are reflected, are very impressive. And the meaning is clear. Those who try to attack us or harm the citizens of Israel will pay a very heavy price.
Even though the attack was lauded, the impact it has on the Houthis' capabilities remains unclear.
They were preparing for this kind of reaction from Israel just in case. They said that they'd emptied their oil storage. And we know that the Houthis have a very long experience of having to be nimble when it comes to airstrikes. So it won't be a knockout blow, but it certainly does send a very strong message, not just to the Houthis in Yemen, that they're not too far away to be hit, but also, of course, to Iran, who are in fact slightly closer to Israel than Hodeidah port in Yemen.
The Iranian-backed Houthis said in a statement on Sunday that the Israeli strikes will not stop its, quote, support for the Palestinian people. Iran also condemned the strike, saying the raids were, quote, inhumane, and that Israel should not be allowed to attack countries in the axis of resistance. Meanwhile, with the IDF's activities ramping up not only in Yemen but also in Lebanon, the US is increasingly concerned over the possibility of a wider war, despite Israel assuring the world that it does not seek escalation.
We have no interest in expanding the war. We have no interest in looking for additional fronts. But if someone attacks Israel, we will settle the account with them, and we know how to do it.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it.
Despite diplomatic efforts, no agreement has been reached, neither with Hamas in Gaza nor with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And with the IDF's second strike in Yemen since the beginning of the war, chances are slim that this front will back down anytime soon.
And still in studio, correspondent Robert Swift. A strong message there from Israel targeting specific terror sites in Yemen. How effective is it likely to be? They came back last time it happened.
They did. I'm not convinced it'll be that effective. The Houthis have been on the receiving end of months of airstrikes from the US, as well as some other allies. And prior to that, the Houthis, they were hit with years of airstrikes by the Saudis and a few other local actors. The Houthis seem to have two main things going for them. One is their strategic location, which enables them to leverage shipping. And the second is that they can take a hit. They seem extremely resilient, and they have demonstrated that for a number of years. Does Israel influence them by conducting an attack like this? It seems very unlikely to me. And even the fact that Israel is vaunting the fact that it was able to hit Yemen, which is so far away, that's a double-edged sword because the Houthis hit Tel Aviv. So it just demonstrates the distance that the Houthis were able to launch at. We know that the Israeli Air Force is a very powerful and advanced Air Force. So it seems more of a feather in the Houthis' cap, unfortunately.
Jonathan, you're shaking your head.
I don't think that people today on the ground in Hodeidah or in other places would agree. There's a difference between being able to fire a missile or a drone and actually having it make it all the way 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers towards Israel. That is an achievement, nothing to belittle. But at the end of the day, the damage today in Hodeidah is quite significant. And I think it sent a significant message. Strategically speaking, of course, it would be better if Israel wouldn't need to deal with it. And if the US and the UK would actually have done that over the many months that passed since that task force was established. But all things considered, I think that Israeli responses have been very measured, strategic. Hopefully, it'll send the message that the Iranians need in order to understand.
Hopefully, indeed. Stay with us. We've got much more to discuss right now. A quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown, and we take a deeper look at the threats out of Iranian-backed terror groups in Iraq this time. Stay tuned. This is The Rundown. Back in a bit.
Sail for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
He's asking where's the boat.
Sold it.
¡Me llega el olor! ¿Quieres una foto? Es un pirata.
I can make that noise too. I can also. I stole.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown. Threats from several parts of the Middle East persist, as we've been discussing throughout the show. Iranian-backed terror groups in Iraq have significantly increased their attacks against Israel in the past few days. The so-called Islamic resistance in Iraq confirming earlier on Monday what it calls the continuation of operations to destroy the enemy's strongholds at an increasing pace. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini takes a deeper look.
The Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility for several cruise missile and drone attacks on Israel in the early hours of Monday morning, including on Haifa in the center of the country. This after a number of strikes targeted southern Israel on Sunday and over the past week, as the pro-Iranian militias based in Iraq continue to intensify their attacks on Israel. The Islamic resistance in Iraq is a term used to describe a loose coalition of terror groups, a banner under which various Iran-backed Shiite militias and armed groups attack American and Israeli targets. Most famous is the Kataib Hezbollah militia group.
We are Kataib Hezbollah, and our enemy is America and the Zionists. And our message is that we will not retreat. We will either win or die.
The term Islamic resistance in Iraq emerged last October and has claimed responsibility for nearly 170 attacks on Israeli targets, the majority of which were either intercepted or didn't reach Israeli territory. More than 70% of the recorded attacks occurred this September alone, according to the Alma Institute, coinciding with the ongoing escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, which has suffered severe blows in the past weeks, including the killing of the group's infamous leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
There is a heat in the hearts. The news of Nasrallah's killing was like a volcano in our chests. Our bodies shiver. We want to be soldiers under the banner of Syed Hassan Nasrallah.
But the Islamic resistance in Iraq is not only an Israeli problem. In January, 3 U.S. service personnel were killed and dozens wounded in a drone attack on a military outpost in Jordan, near the border between Iraq and Syria. This after at least 15 attacks by Iranian-backed militias on American bases in Iraq and Syria since the start of the war, and many more since.
We know that Iran supports these groups. The degree to which they order and direct is something that intelligence analysts will look at. We know they support them. We know they resource them. We know they train them. We know that they're certainly not discouraging these attacks, whether it's attacks by the Houthis, what Hamas did on the 7th of October, what Hezbollah has proven capable of doing, and now, of course, what these militia groups continue to do in places like Iraq and Syria, and now Jordan.
The amplified attacks, part of the Iranian-run Ring of Fire surrounding Israel, with Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and militias in Iraq and Syria.
And now, for more insight, we welcome Intifad Kanbar, president and founder at the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesperson of the deputy Iraqi Prime Minister, joining us from Washington, D.C. Intifad, thank you so much for your time. So this is just what Israel doesn't need right now. Threats from yet another front, the Islamic resistance in Iraq today, claiming responsibility for several cruise missile and drone attacks in recent days, including on Haifa and central Israel. Which militia groups are involved in the so-called resistance, and what insights can you share about the role Iran is playing here?
Thank you, Benita. What you see from these groups is only the tip of the iceberg. Those groups are funded, I repeat, funded by the Iraqi government overtly in a line budget, $3 billion salaries. This is the first time in history a government of Iraq, which claims to be an ally of the United States, funds terrorism, funds the PMF, which is the Hashd al-Sha'bi, and those groups under Hashd al-Sha'bi. The chief of staff of the Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is the PMF, Abu Fadak al-Muhammadawi, he's a head of the Kataib Hezbollah. He said on TV, we are waiting for a signal from Khamenei to attack Israel and to do whatever he ordered us to. Technically, he is answerable to the Prime Minister of Iraq, the Commander-in-Chief, but in reality, he overtly on TV say, I am receiving orders from Khamenei. Despite all that, the United States treat the Iraqi government as an ally, do not hold the government accountable. But if you dig deeper, you find even worse. I can show you this article, Wall Street Journal article, which I advise every policymaker in Israel, every journalist to read it. Came out on September 9th, a fine piece of investigative journalism, 2 years investigation by David Cloud, in which he indicates how the Iraqi whole system has been dedicated to provide Iran with dollar, to smuggle Iranian oil, to provide Hezbollah of funding, to provide these militias of funding, in addition to the funding of the Iraq government. So the whole Iraqi government now openly working to support Iran, support its nefarious activities, and giving a cover for those militias to use government vehicles, government IDs to attack Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, not to mention the numerous attacks on the Kurds.
Right.
According to the Washington Institute, sorry, Benita, I just want to finish this thought. According to the Washington Institute, so far those militias have launched 192 attacks until September 10th.
Unbelievable statistics that you are outlining. And as you say, this isn't only affecting Israel, but other parts of the Middle East at the same time. I want to dig deeper into Iran's role, because Iran itself has said that Hassan Nasrallah's killing would bring about Israel's destruction. But the foreign ministry said earlier today it would not deploy any fighters to confront Israel. So when it comes to the Iranian strategy, is it happy to let these proxies, like those in Iraq and Syria, do the heavy lifting, so to speak?
Oh, Benita, you cannot be more right. I kept saying over the years, Iran used Arab Shias. They don't use Iranian Shias as a cannon fodder, as a wood for the fire. And they use them all over the place. People expect Iran to make a response. Hezbollah is stronger than Iran. Iran internally is torn apart, is weak, and Iran proxies outside Iran are more loyal to the regime and Khamenei than the Iranian people. We see that every day in the Iranian streets. And that reminds us of the Soviet Union, where the communist parties outside the Soviet Union were more loyal to the Soviet Union than the Russian people. So this is exactly what's happening now. And Iran has their best bet, Hezbollah. But luckily, Israel was able to decimate Hezbollah in a very short period of time and destroy Hamas. And I always say, whatever happens on the field, on the battlefield, it will determine the final political outcome. And Israel apparently is capable of doing that. But I'm warning the Iraqi government, Israel may not sit on their hands for too long. They may go and hit, just like what they did to the Houthis, hit oil installations, hit oil tankers, prevent Iraq from exporting oil, which is going to cripple the Iraqi economy, which is unfortunately becoming the main source of income for Hezbollah and terrorism in the region.
And as you've alluded to, we've seen the severe IDF response in recent days to attacks out of Hezbollah and the Houthis as well. What is your sense of how these powerful targeted airstrikes in Beirut and Hodeidah, respectively, might impact these militias operating out of Iraq? They don't seem deterred. Should they be?
I mean, absent of the American role and the weakness of the American role now, and the insistence of the United States on a meaningless ceasefire, gave Israel, in a way, the opportunity to do whatever Israel wants to protect its own people. And that's completely legitimate. And I don't think anybody here in Washington was not happy about the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, who killed hundreds of U.S. soldiers, Marines, in the 80s in Lebanon and elsewhere, and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. So there's no tears shed for Hassan Nasrallah. And despite that, the U.S. policy continues to support an Iraqi government which is completely under the thumb of Iran, continue to push for a ceasefire, which is meaningless because you want ceasefire based on real peace, not on a continuation to save Hamas or to save Hezbollah. So I think the policy have changed in a way because of the American absence. And I think after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, we're going to see a new Middle East, or we may see some heads rolling of those ruling proxies of Iran in the Middle East.
Intifad Kanbar, always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for being with us live from Washington, D.C. Be well. Still in studio, our panel and correspondent Robert Swift. I'm coming straight to you because the U.S. State Department has issued a statement, and it alludes to something we were talking about earlier on. Does the U.S. need to be in the loop if there is a ground operation in Lebanon? Tell us more.
I'm sure they would like to be in the loop, but there's also advantages to the U.S. administration from having a certain gap between itself and Israel. There have been times during the conflict where it was on public display that there was a disagreement between the U.S. and Israel. The RAF operation in Gaza being an obvious example where the U.S. said, don't do X. Israel then did do this, and it caused problems. So by the U.S. having a certain amount of grey area in this regard, it gives additional flexibility, enables the relationship between the U.S. and Israel to work more smoothly. At the end of the day, a lot of these actions that are taking place, it might be Israel that is conducting them, but in lots of instances, the U.S. is happy to see them being done. For example, the killing of Nasrallah. There was obviously no love for him in the United States, and we saw words to that effect.
And several other terrorists as well, some of whom had bounties of $7 million on their heads for decades, and Israel eliminated them in
Israel eliminated
days.
more wanted American terrorists in 2 weeks than the Americans did in 20 years. So
what does that tell you about what could be unfolding when we talk about the next phase that Yoav Gallant is referring to right now in Lebanon?
Yeah, and I think that we need to put things into perspective here in terms of messages going out and statements. I see this as part of negotiations where Israel is indicating through positioning troops and through a credible threat of using forces inside Lebanon, what we are saying is, if you don't stop us, this is what we will do. You can stop us, and the way that you stop us is by forcing the other side to implement 1701 and clearing southern Lebanon of Hezbollah. It's either this or that, but be aware, we're ready to go about it the hard way. And it's still, the mechanics of decision-making, negotiations, world powers, and Israel trying to safeguard itself.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, as always, appreciate your insights on all the latest security developments. Thank you for being here in studio.
Thank you.
Now, as the focus in the war turns to the northern front, as we've been discussing, many families of hostages still held in Gaza are more desperate for a deal that would see their loved ones come home. 101 hostages still being held captive in the Palestinian enclave nearly a year since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction. It's still not clear how many hostages are alive. Aviva Siegel was abducted by Hamas terrorists. She was released in November. Her 65-year-old husband, Keith, is still being held hostage. Let's take a look at her story.
יש לי זיכרונות מאוד מאוד יפים מפסח בשנה שעברה, שחגגנו כולנו ביחד, ואני מאוד מקווה שתהיה לנו לכולנו הפתעה. הכי טובה שיכולה להיות.
This is Keith Siegel. He and his wife Aviva were kidnapped from their kibbutz in Kfar Aza on October 7. Aviva came home in the first and only hostage deal back in November 2023, which saw the return of over 100 hostages from the Gaza Strip. But her husband Keith stayed behind.
I was there with the Hamas terrorists, and I know exactly what it is like. You feel like you're going to die. They play games with you all the time, and they threaten you with a gun in front of your face all the time. Everything that you can think about, they just took away from us. We weren't allowed to feel. We weren't allowed to talk. We weren't allowed to hug each other. We weren't allowed to stand. We weren't allowed to move. Underneath the ground, they even took away the oxygen for us to breathe, and we were sure that we're going to die.
The IDF has repeatedly stated that Hamas committed sexual violence during its October 7 attack and thereafter. A UN report supports these claims. Aviva saw it firsthand.
The most hardest moments for me while I was there, to see them how they tortured Keith and tortured the girls with me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. They didn't even let me cry. The girls are lying down on a mattress and looking at the ceiling inside the tunnel with hardly any oxygen and trying to figure out when is the next time the Hamas terrorist is going to come and tell her, come, you're the next one that I want to rape.
On September 1st, the news came out that 6 hostages were killed by Hamas only a few days before the IDF reached them. Since then, the families of the hostages have become increasingly desperate to get a deal done to get their loved ones back, before it's too late.
Wake up, please. We need the world to stand with us, because Hamas will not release them. They want to keep them. They want to kill them. They want to torture them, because they want to torture us. We've had enough. I've had enough. Kids had enough.
101 hostages remain held captive in the Gaza Strip.
In captivity for almost a year. Still surreal. Now, it's heartbreaking, it's powerful, it's a compelling tribute, and it's called The Faces of October 7th, a new exhibition by Israeli graffiti artist Benzi Brofman and the international organization Stand With Us has opened to the public in Jerusalem, created as a tribute to the victims of the Hamas massacre. More than 1,200 people murdered during the Hamas terror rampage. Terrorists abducting 250 people into Gaza. 101 are still there, as we just heard in that report, nearly a year since the darkest day in the history of the country. And now for more, we welcome to studio Michael Dixon, Executive Director of Stand With Us Israel, and businessman and philanthropist Eitan Nishlos, based in Dubai but visiting the country right now. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. And Michael, I want to start with you because it is difficult to comprehend that it's nearly a year since the darkest day in the history of this country, the 7th of October. And yet there is an exhibit, a creative way, a powerful way to show us the faces that we already feel we know. Tell us more.
Absolutely. So we're coming up to that grim anniversary. Since October the 7th of last year, it's been our duty to tell the stories of those individuals who were massacred, the soldiers who've fallen in battle, and those who are still held hostage in Gaza. And so we wanted to create a memorial space. On October the 7th, we'll be holding memorials throughout the world. We'll have the first memorial in the world at 6:29 a.m. On Bondi Beach in Australia, and then commemorations all around the world from London to Sao Paulo. But here in Israel and Jerusalem, in our visitor center that gets about 10,000 visitors every year, we'll be hosting this Faces of Israel exhibition, which is now open. And we teamed up with artist Benzi Brofman. He was painting at the Nova Festival on October the 6th.
He has an incredible story. Tell us.
Yeah, well, he received a phone call on that day from his wife, who asked him to come home. She had a bad feeling. And that phone call ended up saving his life. He went back home and, of course, saved his life from the massacre, but he's now committed himself to painting the portraits of those that we've lost. And the portraits are artistic and lifelike and have become a source of meaning for the families who've lost loved ones.
And again, so many of us feel like we know these people, we know these faces. Eitan, talk to us about your connection to this project. What resonated with you? You live in Dubai.
Yes, I do. My mission is to embrace the spirit of the Abraham Accords. The United Arab Emirates enshrines its values through a ministry of tolerance that with empathy ensures that 220 cultures are living side by side with one another. And this October 7th exhibition is providing a safe space for the victims of October 7th, of multiple nationalities, of multiple religious denominations to mourn, for Israelis to have a safe space to commemorate, and an opportunity for us to communicate with empathy to millions of people around the world of multiple religious denominations, to look them in the eyes, not to deny them, to feel their pain, to join us to bring them home now so that we can look them in the eyes and offer them a promise of a better future.
And living in the United Arab Emirates and traveling the way you do, what is the reaction that you are getting from people you interact with about what happened on the 7th of October and, to be honest, what is happening still on this day?
Well, I live safely in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, under the shaded palm over there. And since I've been there, I have done the first ever Kristallnacht event. I've taken His Excellency Ahmed Abad al-Mansouri to Auschwitz. We have started the process of restoring 8,000 children's shoes at Auschwitz as vital evidence. But this epitome, the center of anti-Semitism, comes from conspiracy theories, and it's sustained through denial. And as we're restoring the children's shoes as vital evidence, we're now finding ourselves having to hold onto the pillar of truth so that no one will deny our history, not then and not now. We have to scream the truth until there's simply no more lies left to tell.
And Michael, Stand With Us has been so crucial in that fight against anti-Semitism, this bizarre, disturbing spike in the space of this year. Talk us through what stood out for you, what really shocked you about the response to October 7th.
Absolutely. Well, like Eitan, we're living the promise of never again, and now is the time where we need to stand out. And so we've seen egregious anti-Semitism, unlike in the Holocaust, where there was some pause before Holocaust denial. It was happening in real time on October the 8th. We saw people on the streets of New York with signs saying resistance by any means. So we have to be as active as we can be. We have a following globally on social media of 1.5 billion interactions since October the 7th. And we're trying to empower young people particularly, but people of all backgrounds and all faiths from all over the world to stand up and have their voice heard. This was a terrible moment, the most awful moment in modern Israeli history and in the Jewish history since the Holocaust. But of course, now we have an opportunity and an awakening, and now we must all come forward and raise our voice.
So important, and what's so different this time in terms of the 7th of October, Hamas, of course, filming the atrocities, the depravity, the brutality, and yet there's still people who ask if it even happened. Thank you so much for being here to explain your work. Good luck with your work as well. Thank you so much for being here in studio. Eitan Nishlas and Michael Dixon, appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
The faces of the 7th of October. And now, the war continues, and we go back to correspondent Zach Anders. Once again, he joins us from northern Israel. What's the latest there? What can you tell us, Zach?
Hi, Benita. Within the last few minutes, we've just got a closure of 3 communities that I can see right now: Metula, Mishgavam, Kfar Galadi. They have, the IDF has released that air entrance into those communities is now strictly prohibited. I do not see anything that would suggest we've got tank convoys rolling up the hill into those areas. But then again, we might have missed. We've seen an entire armored division staging to our south about 5 miles down into the valley. But these areas where we already noted there were new checkpoints today, we were told that we couldn't get any closer. Well, now the IDF coming down, entrance into those 3 communities now strictly prohibited. Those are communities that are up on the ridge line. Those 2 of those communities are up on the ridge line above Kiryat Shmona here, so up out of the valley and at the same elevation roughly as the ability of getting into southern Lebanon. There are multiple points of access, and as you look at that 2006 invasion map, certainly a concentrated amount of ground forces entered in through those areas that the IDF has just shut down as they rolled into southern Lebanon back in 2006. What we're watching for, of course, knowing that in some of these areas, based on my understanding, and again, this is something that could have already happened, we don't know, but we're told that we should hear detonations of landmines, controlled detonations of landmines around the border before tanks are to roll through into those areas. I'm not entirely sure that we've heard that yet, but everything that I've seen in my experience, my last 11 months here, leads me to believe that an invasion is imminent, that the amount of activity that we've been seeing like that, this outgoing artillery that's been targeting areas very close to the border. That's a familiar style or a familiar amount of military might that was on display in those early days before ground forces rolled into Gaza. What did we see? Well, we saw artillery positions pounding areas, points of entry before ground forces went in, attack helicopters hitting those areas. A combined effort, every avenue of Israel's arsenal targeting on those areas before ground forces move in and before those Merkava tanks start their journey in as an invading force into Lebanon. So as I continue to hear the explosions around me, this is a remarkable amount of activity here tonight. We've noted that a lot of that activity is centered right there on the border towns in southern Lebanon. Which has been remarkable because after the last 10 days, the amount of Israeli Air Force activity has been all across the country, heavily in the south and in the east into the Bekaa Valley. We haven't seen a lot of activity right here on the border. Well, tonight we do. They are pounding some of these places very, very hard.
We can hear that activity behind you as you are speaking to us. You stay safe. Live from northern Israel. Thank you so much, correspondent Zach Anders. And that is a wrap for the Rundown for today. Back again tomorrow, same time, same place. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.